27 years of famine, slinking starving through the pipes. Derry's long-forgotten monster, laid to rest that bloody night. The boogeyman of Derry sewers, older than the written word, heart torn out by erstwhile children, tragic if not so absurd. It rests upon a mound of refuse, gory ichor spilling out. But it felt something else, a voice. A promise not from mortal mouth. The dark fog twists around its body, with gifts of life to be repaid. Limbs mend with rancid flesh resculpted. The dead lights dim. The pact is made. It's just a clown, don't be afraid. Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers. Let's sit around the campfire together and talk about Dead by Daylight. Specifically, Stephen King's It, and the potential and problems of adapting one of the most famous horror stories ever told into Dead by Daylight as a licensed chapter. For as long as I've played this game, Dead by Daylight has been considered by many to be a horror hall of fame in the form of a live service video game. We've got some of Hollywood's biggest horror IPs like Halloween, Hellraiser and Saw, sharing the fog with titans of horror gaming like Resident Evil, Silent Hill and Alan Wake. It's only been recently that DBD has expanded out of horror IP with its licensed collaborations, bringing us chapters for Dungeons & Dragons, Tomb Raider and Castlevania all in the past year. But despite all of these, there's always been a few licenses that have felt kinda like no-brainers, massive iconic names in horror that would more than merit a licensed chapter and would fit Dead by Daylight's established formula well. The big three conspicuous absences, in my opinion at least, are Jason, Predator and Pennywise. And of these three killer candidates, it's easy to understand why at least two of them haven't been integrated yet. Jason is a legal minefield, and has been for the best part of a decade now. An ongoing legal tussle between screenwriter Victor Miller and producer Sean Cunningham means that Friday the 13th might be tied up in copyright hell forever. In a recent interview with Slasher Radio, Matthew Cote outright admitted as much, that Friday the 13th's issues might just be an ongoing nightmare.
And yes, when people say, oh yeah, the legal troubles seem to be over now. I mean, none of these things are ever simple. And the legal troubles for around Jason specifically, or Friday the 13th and all that property have been over in the past and then started again. And then have been over again and then started again. It's almost like the movies, right?
Yeah. Speaking of legal battlegrounds, Predator is a Disney property, the kind of thing that we'd all assume was off limits to a company of Behavior's size until Alien joined the game in late 2023. Until the past year or so, Predator in DBD always felt like a bit of an optimistic idea, a pipe dream that only became feasible with the arrival of Alien, to the point I wouldn't be surprised if those wacky Canadians are working on a Predator chapter right now. That just leaves one very empty chair unaccounted for. Possibly Stephen King's most well-known piece of work that instilled a hearty level of coulrophobia in multiple generations of young people. It. The 1986 novel and its adaptations to the screen in 1990 and 2017 made a colossal impact on mainstream horror and turned its main villain, Pennywise the Dancing Clown, into a superstar icon of the genre. Dead by Daylight has taken its fair share of inspiration from this horror classic. The entity's portrayal as an all-consuming cosmic force that feeds off the fear of its victims didn't come from nowhere, and it didn't take long after release for DBD to add its own 50s-themed killer clown in 2018, although DBD's clown is very thematically different from Pennywise. But these similarities just serve to make Pennywise's absence from the fog all the more glaring. What's standing in the way of a future It licensed chapter? And what might such a chapter look like? That's what we're talking about today. We'll be breaking down It and its adaptations, discussing the possibilities of a future It chapter, and wrapping up, as is tradition, with a power concept for Pennywise the Dancing Clown. To best understand the potential of Pennywise in Dead by Daylight, it's wise to start by looking at the source material and its adaptations, the 1990 and 2017 movies, to get the gist of what it's made of. It is a well-known enough story that you might be at least a little familiar with it, even without having read or watched it. But I'll give a brief overview in case you haven't. Whether we're talking about the book or any of its screen adaptations, it has a two-part story structure. The The first story follows a group of kids called the Losers Club, who band together to defeat an ancient evil preying on the children of Derry, Maine. Beverly, Richie, Eddie, Stan, Bill, Ben and Mike work together to find Bill's brother Georgie, who disappeared down a storm drain. The malevolent force that took Georgie is a shapeshifter that takes on many forms as it torments the children, turning the town of Derry itself against them, even as they learn more of its true nature. But its favourite form, and the one in which it appears to the losers most frequently, is the sinister clown Pennywise, who's usually seen carrying a red balloon. When they learn about the Ritual of Chud, a Native American ritual that allows them to commune with its spirit directly, the losers unite, and Pennywise is defeated and banished from Derry's underbelly. For now. 27 years later, the Losers Club are reunited as adults, as it resurfaces in Derry, and the nature of the threat changes a bit. It's personal now, and the new forms of fear it takes on are reflective of the trauma that each of them experienced at its hands. The goal now is not simply to survive it, but to kill it, and prevent it from harming anybody else, and the Ritual of Chud allows it to enter its metaphysical body to tear it apart from the inside out. The story of it didn't change too much between the original novel and its two well-known adaptations, but I'd argue the biggest change is one made in the movie adaptation in 2017. In those movies, it's only as powerful as it is when its victims are afraid of it, and are too busy being scared half to death to unite against it. The battle between it and the losers is handled very differently in the movie than in the book or miniseries. In the original novel and miniseries, it has the weakness of whichever form it takes, like a werewolf being vulnerable to silver slugs for example, but only the Ritual of Chud is capable of truly banishing it. But in the film it's made clear that its biggest weakness is those unafraid of it. It's why Beverly is singled out and captured by Pennywise in the first film. The monster feeds on their fear, and it specifically targeted Bev because uniquely among the group, Bev did not fear it in the same way the others did. An unafraid victim is a threat that must be removed, and when the losers realise this as adults, it quickly crumbles, as they realise they don't need to fear it anymore. In my opinion, this was a drastic change for the better. In all versions of the story, Pennywise is a shapeshifter, but it always seemed a little odd to me that it inherited the weaknesses of whatever form it took. It undermined the eldritch arcane nature of it to give it ordinary mundane weaknesses, especially something like a werewolf being vulnerable to silver slugs. The only reasonable explanation for that would be that it's vulnerable to silver because it's a werewolf and that's what the kids think will hurt it. It's just a representation of the kids' defiance of it. All the film does here is develop what was already there by uncoupling the act of defiance from strict physical weaknesses. The book Pennywise is vulnerable to kids not fearing it, and fighting back against it, and at least thematically the film doesn't change anything. More than it is either in the miniseries or the novel, the 2017 version of it is the physical manifestation of fear, and its powers give it a vast array of potential avenues to evoke that fear, especially among its preferred victims of children. It takes on a variety of monstrous forms and projects itself over long distances through hallucinations, such as when it crawls out of the camera to attack the losers. It can also influence people by taking on forms they fear and driving them to acts that serve in its interests, with a prominent example being the town bully Henry Bowers. It doesn't control Henry per se. Henry was messed up long before it got involved, but it sinks its teeth into Henry's damaged psyche and turns Derry's biggest bully into his minion. The degree of control that it displays over Henry is highlighted at the start of the adult's plot in all three versions of the story, when he breaks out of the institution that he's being kept in, to the point that in It Chapter 2, he doesn't even think twice about the apparition of his long-dead friend helping him escape. The ambiguity of power means there's plenty to work from in giving Pennywise a functional power for Dead by Daylight. Shape-shifting, hallucinations, and the spread of fear among survivors. There's a lot of potential for a more psychological power that induces paranoia like Doctor or Dredge. And the explicitly supernatural presence of Pennywise would help differentiate him from the relatively mundane clown that DVD already has, or the slightly less mundane but still very tonally distinct other clown that DBD's probably getting in the near future. Pennywise is about as far from the man-with-knife style of slasher as you can get, as an eldritch psychological horror, and reflecting that in the power could have serious potential. But that leaves the question, which version of Pennywise would we want as a killer? The book, the miniseries, or the films? You might be able to tell I'm a firm believer in the film's take on Pennywise being the best suited to DBD's formula. Tim Curry's portrayal of the character is an absolute class act. It wouldn't have become the global sensation it is today without him. But what makes Curry's Pennywise scary is just how human he looks, and how that influences every interaction that he has with the other characters. In the drain when he's talking to Georgie, you don't see a monster right off the bat. You see a creepy guy trying to entice a child to let their guard down, and that's what's unsettling about him. That's vital to making him work in the 1990 series. He's a very intimate threat like that, but divorced with the context of that movie, the character would lose most of its impact. He just looked like a guy in a silly costume, and we've already got plenty of those. Let's compare this to the same scene in 2017's movie. Bill Skarsgård's version of Pennywise is a lot more openly hostile, only barely pretending to be human in his interaction with Georgie. He's cast in heavy darkness, and Georgie seems much more suspicious of him, only dropping his guard when the hallucination of popcorn and cotton candy smell hits, and when Pennywise implicitly threatens him with Bill's disapproval. Tim Curry's Pennywise is a creepy guy sneaking around in the sewer, but Bill Skarsgård's Pennywise is a monster, trying to trick its prey into its lair, and that's an image that translates a lot better to Dead by Daylight, a game where survivors are meant to feel scrappy and lost, and a killer is meant to feel monstrous and powerful. Tim Curry works in his own context, but you could drop Skarsgård's Pennywise into any context, and he'd still be enough to make you shit your pants. It helps too that, unlike Curry's Pennywise, it'd be far easier to convince a studio to let behaviour run wild with the new version of the character, because Skarsgård's Pennywise is very much still marketable, and is being used to further the franchise in a way the 1990 version is not. A TV series by HBO and Warner Brothers called It, Welcome to Derry is in post-production right now. It's a prequel to the new movies that's got Bill Skarsgård back as Pennywise as the only returning cast member from the films, so it's clear they still have faith in that version of the character and want to do more with him. That just leaves the question of a survivor choice, and we don't just have one. The entire Losers Club is present here, and each would definitely have their fans as survivors. Different losers get the spotlight in different iterations of the story. Bev and Bill are prominent in all the entries, with Bill especially in the 1990 version, but the 2017-2019 movies let us see more from Richie and Eddie than we did before. No matter which loser got picked as a survivor, any or all of the others would be fantastic alternate skins for them. They're adult bodies, of course, since, violence against children laws exist. Of the 7 losers in the club, my pick would be Bev, as a dedicated survivor if you wish to go for the Skarsgård version of the story. While Bill is a central driving force behind the plot, as is his brother Georgie, who's Pennywise's first victim, Bev is the one who stands in most clear opposition to Pennywise himself. Uniquely among the losers, she doesn't really fear Pennywise in the same way that they do. Her fear is reserved for her incestuously abusive father. It singles her out as a threat, so adapting her as its counterpart survivor only feels right. Bill would be a great alternative too if we were going for the 1990 version, since he's the one who harnesses the ritual of Chud to directly stand against Pennywise twice, and has to rescue his wife Audra from it in adulthood. But regardless of which loser was picked, a legendary outfit for each of the others would seem inevitable. And as for a map, come on, regardless of the iteration, we know the Derry sewers would be a natural fit for an indoor DBD map. It doesn't even need a realm of its own. I think it would belong nicely in the Withered Isle realm alongside Greenville Theatre and Garden of Joy. Both of these maps are eldritch locations built on the nostalgia of mid-20th century small-town America. Derry fits right in, and I do like the idea of Pennywise living in the underbelly of the realm itself, lurking in a web of pipes underneath the remains of Greenville. I'd love to see Pennywise's ruined carnival as a main room, with the bodies incapacitated by the deadlights looming over the survivors like the hanging bodies on Disturbed Ward or Midwich. The atmosphere could be immaculate, even if another indoor map might make some people groan. Come on, our last indoor map was like RPD or something, let the Stealth Killers have some fun, goddammit. Notably, here's where I'd start wrapping up with my killer power concept, but before I do, I'm afraid I'm going to have to burst some bubbles. After all, this series is called Potential and Problems, and I spent a lot of time talking about the potential this series has for some exciting inclusions into the roster, but there's plenty of reasons that such a sought-after inclusion isn't in the fog already, and in my opinion, probably never will be. To give credit to behaviour, that's definitely not for lack of trying. For over half a decade now, Matthew Cote has been absolutely transparent and upfront with Pennywise having a standing invitation to join the game.
There are 2 names on that list. The sort of the ones that got away, right? Or the ones that never were. That's Jason and Pennywise. And I've said publicly for many years now that when either of them are ready to make the move, the doors of the entity's realms are wide open. Of course, they have a standing invitation to come in whenever they want. And I've always been very public about that.
All it takes is the rights holder to send Behaviour an email, or more likely a reply to one of the dozens in their spam folder, and that's it. Pennywise is in the fog. And Behaviour can clearly afford whatever extortionate fees they'll charge for the rights. They got the rights to Alien off Disney, for Christ's sakes. When it comes to licenses, Behaviour have shown they're more than willing to splash some serious cash. Nah, I believe our biggest obstacle is a little bit more stubborn than that, and it comes in the form of a 77-year-old man writing books in Bangor, Maine. And that's Stephen King himself. King is no stranger to adaptations. He's regularly been involved in adaptations of his own work, in many cases writing his own screenplays based on his own novels concurrently with those novels. This happened with Creepshow, The Dead Zone, Silver Bullet, Cat's Eye, Pet Sematary, The Shining, and more recently Under the Dome. And Sleepwalkers and Storm of the Century blurred that line between screen and page even further, when he wrote the screenplay at the same time as the novel, or even wrote the screenplay first. King's adapted works aren't even always good, and regularly veer off track from King's particular story to mixed results. Sometimes this works out really well, like Oz Perkins' adaptation of The Monkey, but other times you get shit like The Boogeyman, which, while it wasn't the worst horror film of 2023, it was hands down the most boring. It was adapted from 1973's short story by King, and it was a masterclass in dreary generic slop, entirely devoid of anything even remotely resembling Source. At least Tarot had the virtue of having some bang monster dives from Trevor Henderson. The Boogeyman was a toast sandwich, and that much should have been obvious to almost anyone who worked on it. For every King adaptation that was genuinely groundbreaking with or without King's direct involvement, there's been another that has completely flopped. For every Carrie, The Shining, Misery, or Pet Sematary, there's a Children of the Corn, The Dark Tower, Riding the Bullet, or, well, Pet Sematary. Not to mention all the sequels that take the framework and IP of an established King adaptation and freewheel away from it to make a quick buck. While King flourishes with creative control of adaptations of his work, he is by no means protective of it, at least when it comes to cinema. And I think this is because over the past 40 or so years, he built up a good working relationship with Hollywood and its studios. King trusts Hollywood with his work because of that relationship, even if the final outcome of any individual project is a loose adaptation or even, just sucks in general. He knows he'll at least get a financial return on investment and an end product that he can be proud of or at least get away with ignoring. But King has proven himself to be a lot more risk-averse when it comes to doing things he's never done before, and nowhere is that more obvious than the story behind Maximum Overdrive. Maximum Overdrive is the only film Stephen King has ever directed, and it was a complete disaster. King himself has more or less washed his hands of the project, writing it off as a failed experiment that is not to be conducted again. This brings me to the question of video games, because while King has gone near video games in the past, none of them have ever done well, and the last one he went anywhere near came out in 2000. Stephen King's F-13 was effectively a video game anthology of a couple of his short stories, and was basically the Maximum Overdrive of games. Nobody played it, even fewer people liked it, and King has not made a video game since. All subsequent interviews with King have affirmed that he doesn't hate video games per se, and he did allow Remedy to quote him at the start of Alan Wake for the steep cost of $1. He clearly doesn't have much love for the medium, and given that he's 77 years old with more money than God, he has absolutely no reason to ever leave his comfort zone for the rest of his life if he doesn't want to. Getting King to do anything related to adapting his work into a video game is pretty much impossible, much less adapting it into somebody else's video game as part of a live service crossover extravaganza. The only way Behaviour could feasibly pull that off would be to somehow appeal to King specifically and win him over, like how the Alien chapter reportedly won over Scott Cawthon into letting Behaviour make the FNAF chapter. Or if a studio close with King and his work was able to vouch for Behaviour and convince King to play ball. Don't worry, Matthew Cote is a master of making friends in the industry. I'm sure he'd win over a studio. Let me look at the people who made the It movies, maybe he could work with them. That's New Line Cinema. Of course it was fucking New Line. Of all the studios that worked with Behaviour in the past, New Line might have the rockiest relationship with them. They're the rights holders for Nightmare on Elm Street, by far the least supported license Behaviour has ever gotten. No cosmetics, no unique music, no voice lines, nothing. New Line gives us crumbs. If there's any studio Behaviour has worked with that would affirm King's doubts about collaborating with Behaviour, it's probably New Line. So yeah, it's looking pretty grim for the prospects of Pennywise and Dead by Daylight. But there is a tiny sliver of hope. One man who could save us and bring it into Dead by Daylight after all this time. And I cannot believe I'm saying this, but our only hope is David Zaslav. For those of you who aren't aware, David Zaslav is the CEO of Warner Discovery, the company that owns Warner Bros. Discovery and HBO. Since the merger that created Warner Discovery in 2022, Zaslav has developed quite the reputation among industry professionals as a corporate vandal, destroying projects like Coyote vs. Acme, Scoob's Holiday Haunt, and Batgirl that were practically finished but got scrapped as tax write-offs instead of being released. This obviously sucks for audiences, but it's even worse for the creatives who work on these projects because their work they did on these movies will never see the light of day. In film and TV, your career lives and dies on your credits, and if the work they spent months or even years on gets shelved for a tax write-off, nobody will ever see what you made, and you'll have a gap in your resume that will make it harder to get a job in the future. Zaslav's slash-and-burn approach to churning a profit might have made him one of the most hateable people in Hollywood right now, but in our specific case, it might be the key to getting what we want. Multiversus has proven that Zaslav is willing to throw money at any crossover project that flexes his company's IPs, and Warner Bros. Is working on the upcoming TV series, Welcome to Derry. Welcome to Derry is a prequel series to the 2019 and 2017 movies, with the directors Andy and Barbara Muschietti returning as showrunners, and Bill Skarsgård returning to play Pennywise. It will be telling an entirely new original story set 27 years before the first movie in 1962, and aside from Skarsgård, it will have an entirely new cast as well. I took a look through the production credits for the series, and I can't see Stephen King anywhere on them. Not as a writer, not even as an executive producer like Bill Skarsgård. It looks to me like King is not involved in Welcome to Derry at all, meaning he might not have the power to veto a licensing deal. If there is a path to getting it in Dead by Daylight, this is how Behaviour probably has to do it. Get on the phone to Warner Discovery and try and get the rights to the show. Then, even if you can't get the losers directly, you can at least get Pennywise in the fog, and possibly a survivor and map from the TV show to round out the chapter. There are, of course, many points of potential failure for this plan. King might have more control over the rights than it first looks, Zaslav might cancel the show before it comes out for another tax write-off a la Batgirl, the show might just flop, Zaslav might not play ball, or might ask for more money than even Behaviour are willing to pay. Hell, New Line itself is a Warner subsidiary. There's every chance that Warner Discovery is already predisposed against Behaviour because of the New Line fiasco. But it's worth noting that the leadership there got shaken up heavily when the Warner Discovery merger happened in 2022. Anyone who's now receiving emails about the Pennywise rights from Behaviour, now or in the future, are going to be different people than the ones Behaviour approached in 2016 trying to get the Nightmare on Elm Street rights, so that can only really be a good thing. I'm not saying it's a sure thing, but it definitely might work. And I wouldn't be surprised if discussion around Welcome to Derry has been rattling around Behaviour at least a little bit. In any case, if getting Pennywise in DVD was in any way easy, it would definitely have happened by now. And that does not bode well for the character's future in the fog. But there are possibilities to get past the roadblocks that have been up for so long, whether it involves dancing around IP licensing laws like we did for killers like Pinhead or Bubba, or just Stephen King playing Hooked on You and realising what he's missing out on while massaging Spirit's feet. But if we were to get the elusive It right and were able to bring Pennywise to life in the fog, what would the power look like? Let me show you what I've been working on. The Trespasser is a medium height killer with standard movement speed and terror radius and the power Scared to Death. Each survivor has a fear meter. Survivors whose fear reaches a fever pitch are afflicted with pandemonium, and they will scream when they hit that fever pitch and cross the threshold into pandemonium. Survivors cannot see their own fear meter directly. They will only be told if they are in pandemonium or if they are close to it, and the killer can only see whether or not a survivor is in pandemonium at all. When a survivor reaches pandemonium, an apparition will spawn every 30 seconds within 24 meters of them. It is an illusionary copy of Pennywise, functionally an illusory doctor, except it runs directly towards a survivor that spawned it. Apparitions last for 6 seconds or until they run into a survivor, whichever comes first. Survivors will scream again when an apparition runs into them, and will be unable to lose fear for 20 seconds after this happens. The following actions will cause survivors to gain fear. Being interrupted or performing a healing action on an injured survivor, be that yourself or another survivor, will cause a chunk of fear gain. Fully depleting an item's charges, failing skill checks, or becoming injured also all cause a chunk of fear gain. And any survivor becoming injured causes all the other survivors to gain a little bit of fear. But the following actions can be used to reduce your fear. Using a flashlight or standing near light sources, be those flashlight beams, exit gate lights, or completed generators, gradually reduces your fear over time. Blinding the killer causes a chunk of fear to be lost at once, as does rescuing another survivor with a pallet, or completing healing actions on yourself or other survivors. The balloons and paranoid delusions have additional effects on survivors afflicted with pandemonium, and when all 4 survivors are in pandemonium at once, Pennywise can teleport to any apparition on the map. The fear system defines everything about this power. Similar to Dredge's Nightfall mechanic, it ticks up and down in the background depending on the survivor's actions. If your fear is high enough, then Pennywise's influence starts to become more tangible, with hallucinations spawning to torment you and keep you on your toes. But this is just passive stuff that survivors have to manage throughout the game. It gets really interesting when we look at Pennywise's balloons and paranoid delusions, and the additional challenges they pose to survivors in pandemonium. Pennywise carries 5 balloons and can deploy them in any direction. A balloon sent in a direction will travel in that direction at 130% speed until it collides with a wall, where it will bounce and continue its approach in a new direction. Pennywise can basic attack a floating balloon to pop it. Survivors within 24 meters of any balloon will gradually gain fear. A survivor can pop a balloon to remove it, but this will cause them to scream, reveal their killer instinct for 5 seconds, and makes them unable to reduce their fear for 20 seconds. Survivors in pandemonium will hear an illusory terror radius when they are within 24 meters of any balloon, and when a survivor in pandemonium pops a balloon, Pennywise can teleport to that balloon's location during the killer instinct period. The idea behind the balloons is that they are a constant source of information and fear gain that will travel across the map, eventually to about where you need them to go. They linger in the environment as they constantly cause fear to ramp up, and the pandemonium bonus acts as a punishment for survivors just, sitting on gens at max fear. With a fake terror radius playing from all balloons to any survivors in pandemonium, Pennywise might get the drop on them at any time, and they'll need to get their fear down if they want to hear him coming. But best do that before you pop them, unless they want a visit from the dancing clown himself from across the map. Now let's wrap it up and talk about Pennywise's main chase power, paranoid delusions. Pennywise can deploy a clone of himself, a delusion, to run in a straight line for 8 seconds, after which it will despawn. The clone is identical to Pennywise in every respect, and Pennywise can switch places with it twice, once there, once back. Switching control adds 4 seconds to the delusion's lifetime after each switch. When Pennywise switches places with the delusion will keep running in the direction he was facing when he switched. Once the delusion despawns, the power will go on cooldown for 10 seconds. But to survivors in pandemonium, Pennywise will turn invisible when paranoid delusions is first used, becoming only visible when the killer switches. Paranoid delusions would be the first integration of true mid-chase stealth in Dead by Daylight since The Spirit, with a clone of Pennywise designed to fake out survivors, force 50-50s and bait survivors into running into the real Pennywise. The pandemonium bonus adds a challenge to the interaction by making the real Pennywise invisible when this power is used until the first switch, skewing the mind game massively in Pennywise's advantage if the survivor has let their fear get the better of them. The end result here is a feast or famine killer, the kind that could utterly ruin a team incapable of controlling their fear, but gets less powerful as the gens get completed and there are more light sources to remove fear. It's designed to be evocative of the way Pennywise works. The more afraid you are of him, the more unassailable and monstrous he becomes. But as soon as you realise he's only as powerful as you let him be, he rapidly becomes helpless and things spiral out of his control. And I've got a list of add-ons here too, let me know what you think. The original It was a lengthy novel published by Stephen King in 1986, and while King had been an established author for a while prior to the novel's release, the book still made a decent splash. It was highly atmospheric in King's normal style, and Pennywise is widely considered a fantastic antagonist. But the book was infamously long-winded, and some of the characters' behaviour was a little, odd. Especially the graphic sex scene between several children, which was definitely a choice that King made for reasons. It wasn't until the made-for-TV miniseries starring Tim Curry as the iconic clown that it really started to make its mark on the wider horror landscape. It turned a book that was well liked among horror fans but fairly inaccessible due to its length into a widely renowned piece of cinema. It became a proper classic of teenage sleepovers and Halloween all-nighters, responsible for a generation of sleepless nights hiding under the covers and a pervasive fear of clowns. When the 2017 movie hit and its 2019 sequel, It Chapter 2 not long after, it had the unenviable task of bringing that legend to life in a modern cinema context, in a way that respected the book and miniseries that had come before, and it rose to the challenge admirably. One day soon, it may fall to Dead by Daylight to continue that legacy of reinvention, to make good on everyone's hopes and bring Pennywise to life in the fog. I have faith they can pull it off, and I hope when the time comes, they get the chance to show that. Hello everyone, hope you enjoyed today's instalment in the Potential and Problem series. I know I don't make these videos as often as I used to, but I really enjoy making them whenever I get around to them. I have more in the pipeline, but they're for some more niche stuff, so I hope you'll stick around for that. I just wanted to do a quick bit of housekeeping before we signed off for the day. So yeah, I've recently made the Grandmaster's Guide to Skull Merchant 2025 edition. A lot of people ask me how or even if you should be playing her in her current state, so that guide should have everything you need. I love making it and I made it with some great people, so please do go have a look at that one. And one more thing, hopefully very soon I'm going to be back to streaming. I'm in a brand new flat, I finally have the space and the internet connection needed to be able to support streaming on Twitch again, so I'm really looking forward to getting back to that. Fingers crossed it can happen soon, I'm really excited. So yeah, do the YouTube ritual, the liking and the subscribing and all of that stuff. Thanks as usual to my wonderful patrons who make these sort of things possible. They get a day's early access to all my videos, so if you're interested in taking a look, then my Patreon link is in the description. And on that note, I'll see you next time. Ta-ta for now.